This adorable little Wally looking guy is the DJI 3D focus system. And if it does what I hope it does, it just might revolutionize autofocus and make it usable for cinematic shooters everywhere. Hello everybody, I'm Jeremy Burchard. Welcome to another episode of Gear Talk, and today we are doing a review of the brand new DJI 3D focus system. So this thing was announced months ago, but it's just now becoming available to everybody. So they are flying off the shelves. Lucky enough to have pre-ordered one like back in November. So hopefully you also got one as well. If not, I think a couple sites still have them in stock. Just keep checking, set some reminders. They're pretty cool. The 3D focus is an adorable little piece of kit that looks exactly like Wally and sits on top of your camera and connects to your DJI focus motor and RS2 system to provide autofocus features to lenses and cameras that typically don't have them. At its core, this is an extension of the RS2 system, so you have to have the DJI focus motor as well as the RS2 in order for it to work right now. So what exactly is interesting about this and why do we need it? Well, to understand what this does and why it's so cool, first you have to understand why we can't really use autofocus in a lot of cinematic setups. The reason you almost never see autofocus used in professional cinematic work is twofold. First, these cinema lenses are designed to have large focus rings that allow you to basically judge and pull focus based off of distance. You use the focus ring to determine how far your subject is away, and then you pull focus based on that. This means that these lenses don't have a bunch of wires inside. They don't have internal electronic components. They are all fully manual lenses. Now, this allows you to be much more precise and nuanced with your focus, and it also allows you to get these really nice, natural, buttery, smooth pulls in and out of focus that's used to creative effect all the time. Subsequently, most cameras used in cinematic filming don't have autofocus features. We're seeing a couple more kind of come out with some additional features, but it's just not something that a lot of people have really wanted to use because the autofocus technology is so inconsistent for cinematic purposes. Literally, in larger budget projects, you have a member of the crew known as a first AC or first assistant camera whose entire job is to sit there and pull focus as the shot moves along. These shots are typically rehearsed. Everybody knows where they're supposed to be. Everything is planned out, and that's just how it's always been. And the second reason you don't really see autofocus used a lot on, these cinematic setups is kind of what I just mentioned. It's unreliable. There's a lot of kind of issues with the different levels of autofocus that cameras feature, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it relies on how well lit the subject is. If there's a lot of backlight, it might have problems. It's just not a super reliable feature for video filming. For most cases, there can be a lot of inconsistencies in camera body autofocus, and it can lead to like this really ugly, jittery, searching for focus kind of effect that I'm sure everybody who's ever tried to use autofocus is intimately familiar with. So the DJI 3D focus system sets out to fix a lot of those issues and maybe, just maybe, make autofocus an actual viable option for some of these larger or older cinema lenses. The thing that makes this particular unit cool is that it uses LiDAR technology, which basically means it's sending out little packets of infrared light and measuring how much time it takes for them to return to the sensor. It judges that amount of time and translates it into distance, and all of a sudden, you're able to autofocus on things that are directly in the center of the frame based off their distance. So in practical terms, that means that this unit doesn't focus on traditional things for autofocus like available light and stuff like that. You can actually use this in really dark setups, which I'll show you here in a second, and it pulls focus quite nicely. But that does mean that the 3D focus is center focus only, so it's only going to focus on whatever is directly in the center of the frame because that's where the photons of light are being shot and returned to the 3D focus sensor. DJI says the 3D focus system can pull focus on a subject like a person up to about 6 meters away. So now that you have an understanding of what and why the 3D focus is, let's take a look at some footage that I shot before we get into the pros and cons and my final thoughts on this product. The footage I'm about to show you was shot in very low available light outside on a Blackmagic Pocket 4K at 3200 ISO, which again, because this doesn't use anything to do with the camera, doesn't really matter, just figured you'd want to know. And we shot using a Vazen 40mm anamorphic lens. It's a challenging scenario for a lot of reasons, but it's also the setup that I'm probably going to go to most times if I'm looking for a really cinematic look. Okay, so this lens is wide open right now because it's nighttime, and cinema lenses are already pretty soft when wide open, so pulling a nice image on a moving shot with a 40mm lens is no easy feat. Right off the bat, we see the 3D focus finds Jennica's face with a nice, natural feeling pull on this jib down. You can see just how shallow the focus is in the background, so you recognize it's a pretty tight shot. Here we are walking down the street at an angle, a more traditional kind of tracking shot, and it's doing great, maintaining focus right up until I cross over her path and she moves a bit left of the center of the frame. As soon as she hits back into the center of the frame, it finds her again, and as I swing around and flip sides on her, I do a much better job of keeping her centered, and the 3D focus is locked on the entire time. As I play the rest of this clip, notice when and why she might drift out of focus, and pay attention to how aggressive some of these camera moves are. For those curious, I did also briefly test the active track with the 3D focus and got some positive results. I just haven't done quite enough with it in like real use case scenario to give you my full thoughts on it. So active track with 3D focus, early results, looks good, but I got a lot more work to do to really give you my full opinion on that. All right, so that was a pretty demanding setup. Here are a few more clips shot inside using the 3D focus and a Sigma lens that is rehoused in a cinema lens housing. All right, so time for some pros and cons. First pro, it works exactly like they said it should, which is great. It gives you a nice center autofocus for lenses that don't have center autofocus, and you can't really ask a whole lot more than that. Pro number two is that switching between auto and manual focus is really easy. You just hit a little button on top of the 3D focus and it'll switch between whichever one you're not on. And you can also use the gimbal to do it. So super easy if you're worried that you won't be able to quickly get out of autofocus to shoot a manual racked focus shot. Another big positive of this is that when things do actually drift out of focus, it still feels very cinematic, which is kind of part of the function of the lens itself, right? Because it's got such a wide focus throw, you can kind of drift in and out and it still feels good. So all of the footage that I shot, if I were creating a project based off of it, I would think is usable. Even the stuff where, you know, Jennica drifts in and out a little bit, it still has a nice smooth feel to it, and it's not distracting the way that a DSLR trying to find focus totally is, when it's like jittering in and out of finding focus, and sometimes it goes too quickly, and that's when it becomes noticeable. The 3D focus maintains, you know, the basic functions of a focus puller, which is it does it nice and smoothly, and it's a really nice look. If you watch some of your favorite TV shows, some of your favorite movies, you'll notice that people aren't always in focus. They might drift in and out, but you like the content, everything else feels good, the character, location, lighting, everything else feels right, and you're not taken out of it just because a character drifts in and out of focus a little bit. And the fourth biggest pro for me is that it's affordable. And I know you're thinking, whoa, hold on, you have to buy $1,000 gimbal for this thing to even work. And that's true. But you really have to understand the context and the sandbox that this little device is playing in, right? So we're talking about a gimbal that is designed to start working with heavier cinema setups. We're talking about a product that, with the gimbal and this combined, is about the price of a Tilta Nucleus M follow focus setup. We are talking about people who are used to paying 8 times as much for a gimbal to operate certain camera payloads. So when you consider that this is only $170 on top of your gimbal purchase, it's incredibly cheap. I mean, I literally spend $170 on like camera base plates that do less than this, right? So it comes down to obviously what your definition of expensive and what your definition of cheap is. But for me and for the lenses and the gear that I use, the fact that this is only $170 extra on top of an already really great gimbal means it's affordable. When it comes down to it, they're targeting a market of people who are used to paying a heck of a lot more for gear, and this is coming in and doing something that they haven't been able to do before, and they're not charging you, $700 or $800 to do it. That's pretty cool. So thanks for that, DJI. All right, so now for some of the cons. First con, the calibration setup is pretty annoying. It's not very intuitive, and it requires you to calibrate each lens with each new setup, which is fine. You can save profiles of the lens lengths, but you're supposed to focus on a subject that's a meter away, and then you're supposed to focus on a subject that's 4 meters away. And in theory, it should be really simple, but with some of the longer lenses, with having a matte box on the front, I ran into a lot of issues just getting it to recognize that a subject was 1 meter or 4 meters away. So that was a little frustrating. Con 2, which is a little bit similar to the first one, but when you are using the 3D focus with a longer lens or a matte box, you have to make sure that the actual device is sitting up high enough that it doesn't get interference from your lens or your matte box. It took me a little while to figure out that that's what was going on when I was first trying to calibrate this, but basically this lens, this matte box, was so high that when it was just sitting on top of the camera cage with the included pieces of gear for the 3D focus system, I was getting all sorts of problems. However, when I took the DJI RS2 Pro Combo phone mount and I took the NATO Rail hot shoe attachment off of that and I attached this to my camera cage, I was able to get enough height and enough leverage that I could actually use this perfectly. And that is not a problem for me anymore, but it took a lot of work to figure out, and it means that I'm really limited in certain ways that I can use longer lenses with the 3D focus system. Con 3, again, a little more specific to me, but the included hot shoe mount with this comes with a 1/4 20 screw and 2 little security knobs on either side, which this cage has a spot for a screw with 2 security knobs on either side. But it's a 3/8, not a 1/4 20. So if you are trying to just put it into any old 1/4 20 on any part of your cage, you're not going to get a totally snug attachment because it's going to have these 2 little bumps that are just riding against the metal. It's just annoying. I don't think it's a super smart design when it comes to creating a setup that can be used on a lot of different cameras and cages, because not that many cages feature, 1/4 20 with the little security notches on either side. So it's just, I don't like that, and I won't be able to use that particular piece of the attachment for pretty much any of the stuff that I'm doing. In order to keep it together and safe, I had to, like I said, pull from the Pro Kit the phone mount. The fourth con that I found is that the focus doesn't default to infinity when you are shooting something where there's no obvious center frame subject. So what I mean by that is, in most cases, if it's not picking up a subject that's within 6 meters in the center of the frame, you'd expect that it would just default to infinity focus, right? Because that means that if there's not something 6 meters in front of you, it should at least just say, all right, we're going to try to get as much in focus as we possibly can. And right now, in order to do that, you basically have to turn it to manual focus, set your focus to infinity focus, and then turn the autofocus back on. And then if you have, a big expanse where it's just on infinity and a subject enters the middle of the frame, then it'll rack to that subject and the subject leaves and it'll rack back out. And that's great, but it doesn't do it by default. And I feel like that's kind of a no-brainer that could also totally be fixed with a firmware update. I just don't know why right off the bat it doesn't default to infinity focus. All right, final thoughts. I think it's a brilliant use of LiDAR technology. I think that it is a cool proof of concept that is only going to get better. I think that it is the first step towards actually potentially using autofocus in a cinematic setup. And I think that it's so cheap, it's kind of a no-brainer to add it to the kit if you've already gone so far as to get the DJI RS2 Pro kit in the first place. However, I don't think it's something that you're going to use in all situations. I don't think it's a type of thing that you can just set up and forget. There are some frustrations involved with it. I think it's brilliant for things like tracking shots, for one-man band shoots where you're really trying to focus on everything at the same time. It really adds a good peace of mind that as long as you can keep something in the center of the frame, it'll focus on it. But I don't think that it's like a be-all, end-all. I don't think it's going to replace, manual focusing on cinema lenses. I do think that it is going to get a lot of companies excited about the technology. I think that they're going to fix a lot of the small problems early on, and that for a first-of-its-kind product, the 3D focus is really compelling, especially if you use any cinema lenses, any vintage lenses, anything where autofocus isn't an option, but you're going to be doing some potentially challenging shots. I say pick it up. I think a lot of the problems with the 3D focus model will be fixed in firmware updates. I think that some of the hardware issues are because it's the first kind of its product. I think that the iterations of this are going to be really interesting to follow, and I'm on board. I'll keep using it. I'll keep looking for updates, and I'll be excited to get more and more experience with it on projects in these coming months. So what do you think? Did you enjoy the review? Will you be picking one up to go along with your RS2 Pro kit? Let me know in the comments below. And also, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them. A lot of fun. Thank you guys for hanging out. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe, and we will see you next time.